There was a sort of authentic nature and authentic conservatism to Idaho that used to be here. We had Democrats who were conservatives, Republicans who were conservatives, and sometimes the Democrats were more conservative than Republicans. But it was more of a sit around the campfire, work it out kind of politic more than what we have today.
Okay. You were also like in charge of the White House or something. So
No,
you could say a bit player.
Okay.
Like,
I was the Sergeant at Arms doorkeeper of the United States Senate. And the officers of Congress, there are 5 of us, and they are elected by their respective body pursuant to the Constitution saying we will elect our own officers. So I'm the only officer of Congress ever elected from Idaho. So it's a unique little niche people don't know about, but it's more like being the mayor of the Capitol. You know, you're in charge of the security, you're in charge of the desks, you're in charge of the phones, the copiers, you're in charge of all the pilot offices that they have out in the countryside. You're in charge of the cabinet makers, you're in charge of you're in charge of everything. So everybody reported to me.
Your family's been here for about 150 years.
Yeah.
Plus or minus.
Yeah. Plus or minus. Yeah.
Plus or minus. And that means that you have seen the ages of change through Idaho, you know, your family and then you personally.
Yeah.
What are those big changes like? Because the Idaho I'm experiencing today is different than the Idaho you experienced when you were my age, and it was different than the Idaho your parents experienced. What is different about it? What has changed?
We're bigger. We got a lot more going on. Diversity of opinion, diversity of backgrounds. I'm not one of those people who is against people coming into the state. I think it refreshes us. It gives us the economy that we have now. There was a sort of authentic nature and authentic conservatism to Idaho that used to be here. We had Democrats who were conservatives, Republicans who were conservatives, and sometimes the Democrats were more conservative than Republicans. But it was more of a sit around the campfire, work it out kind of politic more than what we have today. But, you know, I think a lot of people are coming here because they like that sort of authentic conservatism that was Idaho, you know. And in that authentic conservatism, we had a respect for the land, respect for the water. Fish and game is a big deal here because we appreciate the outdoors. And we appreciate fiscal responsibility. We appreciate, you know, neighbors helping neighbors, but not sticking their nose into the neighbor's business. So it's just that sort of pioneer spirit that has always been sort of an authentic conservatism here in Idaho.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. You know, I've heard you use this phrase before, authentic conservatism, right. And it's really interesting to me because I do speak with a lot of people. You know, my community in particular is a lot of transplants from other states, Washington, California, whatnot, some native Idahoans. But it seems that a lot of people that have moved here that feel very conservative and live conservative values identify conservatism with really just 1 or 2 topics. I mean, we're talking a lot of them are, you know, they want medical freedom. They didn't want to be forced to get a vaccination. They didn't want their kids to be forced to be vaccinated. They wanted the capacity to either homeschool their kids or have a safer style of public school, and they wanted fiscal responsibility.
Right.
But most of it came down to, I don't want the government telling me what I can or can't do, and I want medical freedom. And they very much feel that those are the things that make Idaho conservative. But when you start digging through it, like if you're an environmentalist or worried about the environment in California, you are a tree-hugging crazy person. And the number of amazing hunters and conservationists that are deep conservatives that exist here, it's almost like you're redefining all of these terms and all of these phrases. It just doesn't compute coming from that kind of paradigm.
Well, except, you know, when I grew up understanding what true conservatism was, the key here was personal freedom, personal liberty. And with that comes, you make your own decisions about these things. You know, you don't want government making these decisions for you. God darn it, you want to make these decisions yourselves. And when you think about it, fiscal responsibility is part of authentic. You don't waste taxpayers' money. A rule of law, you live within the law, and if you don't like the law, you got to change it, but you can't break it. No one's above that law. You got to have a respect for each other and other people's opinions. But individual liberty was the key here. And, you know, what I see happening now in so many of these conservative things is they forgot about that. You know, we want to be conservatives, but we want to tell you how you should live your life too. And so, well, that's inconsistent with authentic conservatism. And I think you see people coming into the state who have they're like a one-issue wonder. This is what they came here for. Well, please come here and understand that if that's how you feel, that's great. Then you have the right to feel that way. But there are other people who feel differently than you do. And that authentic conservatism, that personal liberty that you came here to enjoy, you can't enforce it your way, because then you're going to be ruining that personal liberty. And I think what we've failed to do as a state is sort of inculcate that sense of inclusion. You know, right now there's this hostility towards differences of opinion with the ruling Republican Party. And well, that's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be able to have these discussions. You know, differences of opinions are what make us what we are. We're supposed to have, and we don't have those responsible, mature kind of discussions the way we should.
When you mentioned diversity of opinions earlier, it's like, I don't know what Idaho you're talking about. Because again, and again, this might just be my community, it might be my little niche, but when I was living in California, I absolutely hated. I like discussions. I like all sides of arguments. I like digging in and understanding things, and genuinely not because I like arguing with people. I just like understanding, and understanding comes through discussions. There was no discussion to be had there, because if you had any even remote conservative leaning, you were, you know, like, you're a Trump lover, you're the blah, blah. And it's like, oh my God, well, like, maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but like, can you just explain your position to me? Just like a little bit. Moving up here, I was very excited about the prospect of being in a more diverse, you know, ideological, you know, area, right? But what I've found is that we have the same style of communication up here. It's just on the other side. It's, you know, oh, she probably loves Biden or something. It's like, I have no idea. Like, but like, can you address her issue? And it all comes down to this: which tribe or which fire are you hanging out by?
Yeah. And that's a relatively new thing. And I think it comes about because of President Trump introducing a sort of negativeness to how we have these discussions. You know, it used to be you didn't call people names in politics. You know, well, let me rephrase that. Recently, in the old days, it was mud throwing all over the place. But in recent times, this has been sort of a vitriol that has been introduced in the last maybe 10 years. And I think it might have begun with the white backlash to Obama. From the South, I don't know, but it seems to have been a new vitriol that has only recently increased. Now, I can remember the days when we had Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures and stuff like that. And even back in those days, you disagreed, but it was civil disagreement. And that's what I think is missing right now. Hopefully we'll grow out of that, because this kind of lack of civility it's not about helping the government. We're supposed to be electing officials to represent our point of view, but then go back and make the government work. Not to elect people because they're more extreme or more pure than I am. And we've lost that. We've lost the center around which we should rotate.
There's a lot of discussion. Every time this comes up with somebody, there's discussion about Colorado and like how we lost Colorado. We lost. I was like, first off, I didn't lose squat in Colorado. I've been there like twice, right? And it's discussion about like, oh, this is how it works. I mean, here we are in this incredibly red state. I mean, leaning really far right. And everyone is horrified of like the submarine Democrat or like the rhino Republican, that like they're slowly, you know, getting themselves in position to like take over the state and just jump on us. And it cracks me up. It's like, who? Point to these people, like point. And it's again, it's almost like we have a lack of Democrats. Like if we had more Democrats, people would be happy and they could find him. They're like, see, like Steve over there, he's a Democrat. It's like we don't have enough, and everybody's out looking for it because at the end of the day, when you have essentially like a one party, which we kind of have in Idaho, right? I mean, you have the Republican Party and then other people, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
and it be
Ellen,
that,
we don't want to move into that neighborhood because there's Democrats there.
right?
Yeah. Stay away from that. Yeah. I know. I
Right.
totally get it.
And then
I totally get it.
obviously you have the Republicans fighting against each other. So they
Oh,
have to
yeah.
start coming up with these insane ideas or conspiracies and socialism and this and like, look at this person.
You know, the internet is not always true. And that's where a lot of people get their news. And just because you repeat something a number of times doesn't mean it's true. And what we have now are a lot of interesting but not factual conspiracy theories out there. And rather than trying to have the discussions about whether these things are true or not, we just like to point fingers and call names. Somebody refers to me as a rhino. I've been a conservative before it was cool, so I remember what being a conservative was all about. I think a lot of this is that people come here thinking that they're conservative because of their individual values, and they don't understand that being conservative is more than just what you think. It's your opinion and the preservation of the right for you to have that opinion, but it's also the preservation of the right for other peoples to have a differing opinion without being called a name. And that kind of logical, mature discourse is what's been lacking. And I don't, I have great faith in the generation coming up, but I can tell you in talking with my son and his people and his friends, they don't like this extremism where to have a difference of opinion or a difference of being where that is considered bad simply because it's not your way. We're going to lose the youth vote. We're going to lose the women's vote. We're going to lose independence as a party. And that will open it back up to, a different political party. Those who think that this extremism is somehow a way to keep the party in power are mistaken. It's a way to limit the amount of people you allow into your tent. It's not a good place to be.
When you talk about losing the youth vote, that makes perfect sense to me because the realities of self-reliance are very hard and sharp, and they're painful, right? Because you have to be held accountable to the horrible decisions that you make on a regular basis. And that's just not a fun place for an 18-year-old to exist, right? So when somebody's like, hey, there's a reason why, more Republicans are older people than younger people because, Democratic Party offers a lot of, hey, we're all just trying our best kind of vernacular. But when you talk about losing the women's vote, I've heard you say this before. What do you mean specifically? What is happening in the Republican Party or on the right in Idaho right now that makes you feel like the Republican Party will continually lose the women's vote?
It has to do with, I think, the pro-life issues versus pro-choice issues. I'm personally pro-life. My wife is personally pro-life. My family is personally pro-life. But the way that and when we all thought that Roe v. Wade was settled law, and that the only thing different between what we had under Roe v. Wade and what it may go to would be states making that decision instead of having a Roe v. Wade impact. But what's happened is that women who have enjoyed 50 years of freedom to do what they wanted to do with their own bodies are suddenly now being denied that freedom. And that things like recent decisions are making it ever more scary for them. We will, I have friends whose daughters may leave the state because of the severity of the Idaho law. We have to decide, to be a pro-life state is fine, but you have to understand that you are taking away a right that women have enjoyed now for a generation and putting it back into what they would consider the old-fashioned days. We have to be really cognizant of that. And I think the answer to dealing with that was what I've heard Nikki Haley say, is we need to have a real discussion about this. And not some either you're pro-life or you're pro-choice. If you're pro-life, then, if you have an abortion, you're killing. I mean, we don't have any kind of discussion now. And women are not happy about that. conservative women are not happy about that, how they're being sort of punished for what might be, in their minds, acceptable behavior. The other thing I think we have to think about is, in authentic conservatism, you try not to legislate morality. You try to win moral debates based on the debate. And we're now seeing conservatism to be wanting to legislate morality, and that's authoritarianism. That's not what a conservative is. So I think you're going to see, maybe if we could go back to having that discussion and give credence to the concerns of females more than we are now, that maybe we would be able to stop that. But right now they see this as, I think, sort of an anti-woman party, moving more anti-woman all the time.
The idea that you push an ideology so far that you convert people that would have otherwise been tolerant of maybe some of the imperfections of a position, and you push those people that were otherwise tolerant of these things to the other extreme. I couldn't agree with you more. I was having this discussion. I was railing against some of the literature in the public schools in California that I found exceedingly distasteful, and at least saying, hey, look, maybe I don't like this, but at least you should be letting the parents know what you're giving the kids to read, right? Like this is this is an important thing. And California was sliding farther and farther into, we are the parents, right? The educators are the parents. Yeah. We have to save the children from the parents' horrible monstrousness, right? And one of the points I kept trying to hammer with people is, look, I am a tolerant individual, right? I have, my brother is gay. I have no problem with it. I love my brother. Totally fine. But you are pushing so hard with these books, you're going to get this enormous backlash from people that would have otherwise been tolerant like myself. And that's going to be bad for everyone, because then what's going to happen? You're going to have a community fracture, and then the people that absolutely can't tolerate the most extreme of institutional ideologies are going to take off. I mean, it's going to be terrible, right?
Right.
Same kind of thing I think you're pointing out, which is, look, if we don't work with people to some degree, they will not be browbeaten into agreeing with us. They will just go somewhere else.
Exactly.
If you want to strengthen the Republican Party and strengthen and preserve true conservatism, it can't go by the way of extreme puritanical ideology.
Right. I mean, take the issue of a gay person. They can be conservative. Why couldn't they be conservative? What is it in conservatism in today's lexicon that says we can't have respect for gays? I don't care. That's part of the personal liberty part of being a true conservative. If they're gay, they're gay. So what? What I've seen happen is that people are now taking religious beliefs and playing it on top of the politics like that. And I understand a little bit of that, but you have to understand that the party platform ought to not be a religious platform, and we ought not govern from, a single religious point of view. That's why we have, quote unquote, separation of church and state. And I realize that that's not in the Constitution, and that's just a letter that was written by Thomas Jefferson. But that's why we allow the politics of the church to stay out of the governance. And, I don't see anything wrong with including people in conservative movement who have a difference of opinion on things like gay. They should be a part of it. And we've turned the conservative philosophy on its head, the true conservative philosophy on its head, if we would not consider them to be part of the conservative movement, if they wanted to be.
Right. Right. And to be clear, it's one of those things where taking such a strong position, as was the case in California, and not including parents in the discussion. And again, we're talking about public education here, not including parents whose children you're educating, and forcing this position onto them without even discussing it. It's like, listen, just stop. I have no problem educating my children about homosexuality and difference of ways of life. All of this, I have no problem with that. I'll take care of it. But the idea that you have to take it out of my hands and you have to become the educator was such a distasteful position. I just couldn't.
It's exactly the opposite of what. If you're passing laws to do stuff like that, you're passing laws to be intrusive.
Right.
And that's not what conservatism is about. I don't care if you want to do that. That's what you want to do, but don't call yourself a conservative, me or Rhino, because that's not what that is. I'm the true conservative. You're You're actually passing more laws. You're an authoritarian. So don't call me that. That's sort of the conversation we have to have. Let's have a real conversation about these things and stop pointing fingers and calling names. If you believe in individual liberty, you believe in individual liberty. If you don't, then just say so.
You have mentioned, I've heard you mention about Idaho being kind of home of extreme legislation.
Yeah.
And having the reputation of just being extremist. What do you mean by that?
Well, they passed a number of bills over the course of the last few years that, when first of all, it was some of the abortion legislation that came out. And Idaho is referred to as sort of the extreme side of that. Understandably, I understand where that comes from. But it just falls on some of the other things that have happened in Idaho in the past. We had the skinheads and all that other stuff. So we were recovering from a reputation of being a little bit extreme. Then there was the thing about all the readouts in North Idaho where all the anti-government folks were going. So we had a little bit of a place to dig ourselves out from in the first place. And then we passed some of this extremist legislation that was mentioned after the overturn of Roe v. Wade. But then, it's things that people bring up as legislation to prove their bona fides, their Republican conservative bona fides. I don't know that there was a big issue about cannibalism in Idaho. I didn't read anybody being convicted of cannibalism in Idaho. But think about this for a second. It was on national. What is the rest of America thinking if Idaho has to strengthen its laws against cannibalism? And, we didn't, it might have been well intended, but we got to think about these things when we do these things. And it doesn't help our reputation much when that happens.
When you talk about using legislation to essentially validate your position within a party, this is something that's been very curious to me because we've had, I think the governor has only, in the 2 months that we've been in session, just over 2 months, he's only signed like 5 or 6 bills. Right. And there have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds brought to the table. Do you think people are actually bringing bills to the table that they feel will bring meaningful change and push Idaho forward predominantly? Or do you think people are just using these bills and crafting these bills to signal to their constituents, hey, I'm just getting backlash from, the rest of the House?
Well, I think in every legislative body, there are those who are the workhorses, who are doing it what they're supposed to do. And then there are the show horses. I mean, it's true in every legislative body. And, there's a lot of bills that get introduced that are there to prove that I am sufficiently conservative to meet the purity tests that are now being brought about by the Freedom Foundation. Did you vote? I think it was, you mentioned somebody, it was Julie Yamamoto, who had been censured. And of all of her votes, there were 6 votes of the thousands or hundreds of votes that she'd taken, and she was censured by those 6 votes. Well, did those 6 bills that she voted against pass? And I think in all 6 cases, no. So it's not uncommon for people to draft legislation to state a position that is a philosophical position that will never become law, but it's a statement. You need to vote for this bill because it's a statement. So yes, I think there are those who are the show horses. I'm not going to name names. And then there are those who do the work, who actually get the legislation passed.
Yeah, in the case of Julie, what was really interesting when I did end up speaking with her, and she very kindly came on. I'm not even her constituent. She was totally cool with coming on and explaining her position, which was great as a public representative. And her position was essentially, look, I don't like the state taking control from local governance.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Damnedest thing, right?
Yeah. Well, she's taking the conservative position. As Thomas Jefferson reminded us, that government which governs closest to home is the better government, right? She's defending local school boards, local control. And you have this would-be Republican group saying, oh, no, we need to step in at the state level and take over. Well, I'm sorry, but that is not a conservative point of view. Julie's is the conservative point of view. And if there's a problem at the local level, the locals ought to take care of that. The state doesn't need to step in and take care of it. It's a little bit like, the legislature saying, no, we don't want the federal government in here. We don't want the federal government taking control. Well, of course you don't. And the folks at the local level don't want state taking control. So you can't have it both ways. And we see that a lot. Well, and right now at the state, we're going to take control. We are actually going to censor representatives who are duly elected because they're not pure enough according to our party. excuse me, you are censuring a duly elected representative of the voters because they didn't vote your way? That's bass backwards.
And who's doing the censuring? Right. Who's the person who gets to reprimand the elected official? Is that person elected? Does that person have some background that, we should all acknowledge and we all recognize?
Well, the party has a system by which precinct committee people are elected. Precinct committee people then elect their representatives. And so in a way, yeah, these are elected folks. They're elected by the party people to represent the party's point of view. But I would remind people, political parties are simply interest groups. They don't have any standing in the Constitution. They don't have any standing in the Bill of Rights. They don't have any standing in terms of governing our government. They're an interest group. And obviously, there's no such thing as purity in an interest group. It's like the Wool Growers Association is an interest group. The home builders is an interest group. The parties are an interest group. So what business do they have other than, well, you're violating the party platform? Everybody violates the party platform. Everybody's always violated the party platform. But what business do they have in censuring an elected representative by the public at large? And, okay, maybe as a party they can do that, but that's not a party I want to belong to.
Do you think that the rise of the party insofar as we see today, which is the party has incredible control with voting guides and the capacity to censure meaningfully and do all these things, do you think the rise of that is that more and more people are putting their decision-making process in the hands of the party, right? Like they're just saying, hey, I'm too busy. I'm doing too many things. I can't possibly keep up with all this. Just tell me what to do.
I'm going to say something incredibly provocative.
I can't wait.
I spent 30 years in Washington. As elected officer of Congress, my job was to evenly enforce the rules, right? The Capitol and of the goings-ons in the legislative process. I found that the greatest interference in getting things done has become the increased partisanship. I can remember the days when Orrin Hatch of the far right and Ted Kennedy, the lion of the left, would argue on the floor about policy, and then they'd go back in the cloakroom and joke. It was all about policy. It was about better government, because those two could make things happen by compromising. Then you have the parties, and I'll tell you how it works. The party, when you're elected, you go to the party caucuses, and they teach you all the issues, and they teach you what your position ought to be, and so they harden you on whatever side, harden you on the right or harden you on the left. And then it comes down, for instance, like the recent immigration bill. Probably the best bill I can remember coming along in 30 years. Was it perfect? No. Is there such a thing as perfect legislation? No. But it would have at least solved the problem for the here and now, because it's a big problem. I know it's a big problem. But we've had presidents and Republican Congresses, presidents and Congress of the same parties on both sides, and they have failed to do anything about it. So you had a bill. But it failed because of the party. It didn't fail because it was bad policy. It failed because it undermined one party over another. This is not the way it's supposed to be. I have long felt that wouldn't we be better off if we outlawed the terms "my fellow from the other side" or the other party? Because Congress has become so partisan that it is the party that matters over policy. And that's just not the way it's supposed to be. And I fear that's happening across the country. And it's an accepted way of doing business, and I don't think it should be acceptable at all.
Where do we go then? Because you have people moving here every single day, like me, that are moving here for one or two issues, be it family, be it medical freedom, whatever you want. You have people moving here every single day that don't understand these nuances. And Idaho is not a huge state. So every person who moves here matters, 20 times more than if they moved to California. The votes matter. They're unfamiliar with the state. They're unfamiliar with the history. They're unfamiliar with the issues. Where do we go in not telling people what to think, right? Because that's never the end. It's, hey, you just need a little education and a little help on the happenings here, where you fall in the history of Idaho, what trajectory this state was on, what it is attempting to do. And that's not to say that the people that move here are not now part of that history. You absolutely are, right? We're all part of this big, nasty pot of bubbling insanity. But
see, I'm not one of those people who dislikes folks coming here. I see it.
Well, I sure hope not.
I mean, it's healthy for us. I can remember the days when, I would play down at the Capitol when I was 8 years old or something. You go out to Houston and it was a little town. Now it's a road. So we didn't have a healthy economy. We needed to have more people move in. And I think people moving in, it helped create Micron. It's helped create sort of the vibrant downtown that we have. I'm not opposed to that. But what I am opposed to are people who are using this tendency of Idahoans to be authentic conservatives to ruin the party with some kind of a authoritarian whatever. It's just not right. So I think it's time for people who understand this, and I mean people from California, people from Colorado, people from Washington, who come here for what is Idaho. And it is not a name calling conservatism. It's a let's get the job done kind of conservatism. Let's not point fingers. Let's get in and do the job. And I think a lot of that's been lost. And it's sort of incumbent on maybe the governor and folks who have served Idaho before to sort of bring us back to center where we need to be. This is a great place to live, and it's a great place to live because we respect each other's opinions. We have an open dialogue. We don't call our enemies names because they don't see things the same way we are. And if you're going to do that, then go back to where you're from, because that's not how we do things here. You knew who I learned that from? I learned that from a Democratic governor named Cecil Landris, who, when I first came back to be president of IACI, he didn't like my positions and tried to get me fired. But I learned that he didn't call his opponents names as much as he said, we're going to work this out. We're going to be problem solvers. And he was elected as a Democrat in Idaho, I think 4 times, because he saw it as a chance to govern. And that's what we need to return to. And I got to tell you, quite frankly, at the national level, I wouldn't be heartbroken if we did away with the Republican and Democratic parties at all, because I think they right now are more problems than they are solution. I mean, you think about when you go to Congress, you choose your party. Then they have the party caucus, and then they have the party this, and they have the party that. They indoctrinate you. And it sooner or later becomes that you are more loyal to the party than you are to the people that you represent. I mean, I know this is going to be provocative, but it's true. And that's not healthy. It's not healthy for the country. It's not healthy for us.
I don't think that's actually as provocative as you think. I think that's what a lot of people think.
Well,
I think a lot of I actually the first time I spoke with Julie Yamamoto, Representative Yamamoto, I asked her that exact thing. Who are you loyal to?
Yeah.
What is it? Because the party appears to be this large entity who's saying, "Hey, you better listen to what I'm telling you to do." And then you have these tiny people who are actually the ones voting these people in, saying well, what about me? Right. And in Julie's case, specifically with the school bill from 2022, she was saying, look, or 2023, whichever year it was, it doesn't matter. But she was saying, look, the people were not happy with that bill. I was receiving email after email saying, I don't like this bill. I want local control. Maybe I don't even like these books, but the state shouldn't get involved in this, and we shouldn't tolerate. The other aspect of how laws are actually made, very rarely is a bill presented fully formed and beautiful, and everybody's like, oh my God, it's the second coming. This, very frequently, they are just these horrible versions of the final version that they got to be tweaked and they got to be massaged and compromised and add this in and take that out and all these different things. And voting them up and down is the way that you do that.
Right.
Look, it's not quite ready.
It's called compromise.
Right.
Yeah, called compromise. You have no greater example of a lack of ability to do that than some of the representatives in the U.S. House, right? Government is about a compromise. You can't have it your way all the time. In fact, you don't want it your way all the time, because there are people in Kentucky see things different than people in Idaho, and people in New York see things different than the people in Utah. I mean, that's just the way it is. So you got to make compromise. We have people there now who want some kind of purity in how this works. Well, that isn't how it works. And people say, well, yeah, but I have to stand up for my conservative values. Yes, you have to stand up for conservative values. And then it is incumbent on you to try to educate people about those conservative values so they see it your way. It is not incumbent upon you to wreck government, to stop passage of bills based on your philosophy. That's not how this works. And right now, everybody says, "Oh, yeah, that's how this works. You have to be pure, or you don't count." Well, you don't count if you're pure.
Let me ask you this: how do we navigate compromise when people are horrified? Like we talked about Colorado, people are horrified that any inch you give up to something that doesn't reflect your exact position is just another like brick that they're making, and they're gonna like storm the Capitol and all of a sudden take it over in the sea of blue. I mean, because
Talk about storming the Capitol. That's a whole nother issue. Okay,
but how do we deal with that? Because people view compromise as like the worst 4-letter word ever. I'm like, it's not 4 letters. They're like, but it is.
It's reality, and you know, maybe more people need to understand reality, and this is how it works. And you know, I know people will say, "Oh, you spent too much time in Washington. You got that marble fever." I spent a lot of time in Washington fighting for the issues. I mean, I was the original author of the Balanced Budget Amendment. Boy, I sure wish we had that, right? But if you know, you just have to keep fighting for those things. And now I think it's a matter of, look, this has gone too far, and I think everybody understands this has gone too far. The Republican Party in Idaho has gone too far. And this whole idea of compliance reviews of elected officials and then a censure, boy, that sounds like the Politburo of other countries. It's gone too far. I think, you know, when this election is over at the national level, I think that the name calling and the retribution and all that stuff, I mean, people saying where we're going to violate that's going to go away. And I believe that the system is strong enough, both here and at the national level, to go ahead and continue to operate, because we've seen civil wars, we've seen all sorts of stuff. And at the end of the day, I mean, even in the MacArthur age during the 50s, you know, it comes in, it pollutes our system, it looks like it's going to go, and then the provocateurs go away. Rational people begin to emerge. And I think you're beginning to see that here in Idaho, too. People who have been chairman of the Republican Party. We talk about Trent Clark or Tom Luna or other folks who have been chairman of the Republican Party saying this is not what we're about. So I think we're going to weather this as we've weathered those other storms and return to a place where we can have reasonable, mature dialogue. I think that'll happen here as well.
So you think the pendulum's just going to swing back?
It always does. It always does. And you know, when that pendulum swings, if you are one of those people that's taking the party down a dead end street, when you hit that dead end, you're going to have to pay that price. I mean, if you're a political candidate or you're a politician holding office now, and you've taken that pendulum, when it hits that dead end, it's dead end. So you know, that's why I'm calling on other people who know some of the things that are going on are not true, that they need to speak up now, so that they can be on the right side of history.
Well, I have to say your optimism does make me optimistic, because I as of late, I've been wondering, is it just going to keep going this way? And again, I think I try to take the most charitable interpretation of everyone I speak with, or, you know, okay, look, start with the number one premise. I'm an idiot. So they obviously know something I don't. There's got to be a reason why they're doing this. And that's what I like to explore. But there are times when I'm just like, this is out there, you know, that whatever the issue might be, I'm a very creative person. I'm good at imagining reasons why somebody might arrive at this decision or this conclusion. And a lot of times I'm at a loss.
Well, you know, I've been involved in politics since 3rd grade. I ran for a 6th grade class president at Kelch School against Denise McFadden. Her dad was chairman, or
Denise.
She was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Her dad was. I beat her 23-3. Cleaned her clock. Then I ran for office.
Take that, Denise. I made an 8-year-old cry.
Yeah. But so my memory on politics, from Ralph Harding, a Democrat that represented us, to Compton I. White, to Steve Sims, to Helen Chenoweth. I know all these people. I have been up to my eyeballs in politics my entire life. And I learned after I lost student body president at the University of Idaho to Mike Mitchell, I realized that my job is not to be a candidate. My job is to do whatever it is that I do behind the scenes. And I have absolute, total confidence in the resilience of our system. What I don't have is absolute total confidence in the wisdom of our party leaders. And I think the system is capable of doing what it has to do if the party leaders would act more responsibly, both sides. Or get away with them. I'm going to read you this one thing.
Please do.
There is this quote from George Washington in 1796. This was the quote that's often used. This was his farewell address. This is the founding of our country. This is our founding father. Quote, excessive partisanship, quote, serves always to distract the public councils, enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one party against another, foments occasional riots and insurrection. So this is what he said in 1796 about political parties. We just recently had an insurrection. And it's because of this stuff we argue over, which is an extremism, which is fomented by parties or factions within the parties. He was right then. He's right now.
Well, Greg, listen, I've had you here for hours. And
It's great, though. I've loved it.
This is absolutely, it has to be first of many. Please come back. And again, if we weren't chatting for hours before now, I'd keep going, but it's been almost 3 hours you've been here. I really appreciate you.
Oh, I enjoy it.
I've learned a ton today. Please come back. Let's keep the conversation going.
Great.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it very much.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.